Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing my March reading wrap up. Now, if I still sound a little ill, I do apologize. I'm still recovering from that cold that I mentioned at the end of my last video. I find it highly ironic that I made it through the entirety of winter without getting sick once, and spring hits, and here we are, I am ill. So, with that being said, just please forgive whatever this sounds like. I have no idea how it's going to translate. But I read 11 books in the month of March, 10 of which were full-length novels, one of which was a novella, and 2 of those full-length novels I listened to via audiobook. So the first book that I finished in the month of March was Stranger Skies by Pascal Lassalle. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It is very much French, I do believe. But this is the sequel to Curious Tides, and I ended up rating this book 4 stars. I do want to say I'm not going to touch too much on the plot of this book because I feel like it would well and truly spoil the plot and the premise of the first book, which, like I said, is Curious Tides. But I will talk a little bit about Curious Tides just in case you are interested in starting this series. I think it has a really interesting premise and a really cool magical system. So, if you're thinking about it, I highly recommend you pick it up. But Curious Tides follows our female main character, Emery, as she returns to her school. So if you love an academy setting, this is for you. As she returns to her school for another semester. And she's really there at this point to uncover the mystery of what happened to her best friend and roommate, Romy, at the end of the prior semester. So the prior semester, before the events of this book, Romy and about a dozen other highly gifted students disappear and are presumed dead. And prior to that, Emery and Romy's friendship is strained. She feels that Romy is pulling away from her and is starting to keep secrets from her. And so she has returned in Curious Tides to find out why this all happened, like what Romy's motivations were, what could have possibly happened to her, where she might have gone if she is in fact not dead. And the magic system in this series is really, really fascinating. It follows the lunar cycles, so new moon, full moon, waxing moon, waning moon, and each house kind of has like a category of powers that you can get if you are born into that lunar phase. Additionally, there are the eclipse born, who are of course quite rare and who have very rare powers. So like we have in this book a nightmare walker, and we have a person who can alter the flow of time. So it is a really cool magic system, very lunar based. And of course, like I said, our girl Emery is trying to figure out what happened to her best friend. And Stranger Skies kind of follows the same plotline. So if you're interested, please go read Curious Tides. I very much enjoyed that book. Now, after Stranger Skies, I ended up picking up Educated by Tara Westover, which is a memoir, so I did not rate it. But this follows Tara kind of through her early childhood years to like her 30s-ish, somewhere in there. Tara was born to a fundamentalist Mormon family. She is one of, I believe, 7 kids. And while, she is supposedly homeschooled at home, that kind of doesn't really happen. Her parents kind of use their children as free labor. Tara initially grows up highly isolated in a small town on a homestead where, like I said, she receives little to no education. And when her older brother decides that he's going to go to college, a decision for which he is very much ostracized from his family, Tara decides she might want to do the same for herself. And because she is a woman, it is received even worse than her brother's decision. And she eventually decides that she's going to do this. She makes it happen for herself. And it's kind of a story of where she came from and how education kind of expanded her worldview and challenged the principles that she grew up with, and therefore kind of strained her relationship with her family and kind of how she copes with that. So if you have not read this, I highly recommend you do. It is definitely a genre that I don't typically pick up, but this book has been on my radar for a hot minute, and I'm so glad that my bookshelf scavenger hunt kind of forced me to read this, because I probably would have taken much longer to get around to it. However, it was on my books to read in 2025 list, so I would have hopefully read it eventually this year, but I am glad I got to it early. Now, the next book I picked up after that was Hookshot by Chatty Ryan. This is the third book in the Hoops trilogy. The first two books are Blackshot and Longshot. I will say, when I picked this up, I thought it was the first book in the trilogy, and I was sorely mistaken. Not that it's the end of the world. They are interconnected standalones. You can read them out of order. Even interconnected standalones, I try to read in order, just because I find that sometimes you get context for a couple that you would not have gotten otherwise, because they show up in somebody else's story on like the periphery. So this book follows Keenan and Lo. Keenan is a basketball player. Lo is a like fashion designer, kind of, sort of. She works at an atelier and is kind of a jack of all trades there. But the two of them kind of have a little bit of history. They know each other through another couple whose book was told prior in this trilogy, which is one of the reasons I said I kind of wish I had not picked it up when I did. Not that it was a bad book, but we missed a little context. But her cousin and his teammate are married, and so they kind of have met through them prior to the events of this book. And the two of them reunite because he is going to be a spokesperson for her atelier's new line of watches. And they do definitely have an immediate pull towards each other, but neither of them kind of want to act on it for their own personal reasons. He has a young child who has just gone through his very, very messy divorce with his ex. And she has done a very good job of keeping herself like emotionally walled off from people. So this follows their kind of story of how they, drift closer and pull apart and, the whole 9 yards. But I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. And the reason I rated it 3.5 is because, frankly, I was a little bit disappointed. It was a well-written romance. I enjoyed the relationship between these two characters. So you might be thinking, well, what was your problem then? My problem was that this is a sports romance, or at least this is marketed as a sports romance, and I felt much more like it was a contemporary romance. Every other sports romance I've read and loved, the sport has been like a big part of the story. Either like we're in season, or the main character's found family is their teammates, or, somebody who works for the team. Like, that is kind of, in my mind, a sports romance, and I feel much more like this was a contemporary romance where the male main character just happened to be a basketball player. So for me, it just kind of killed it. I will say I will readjust my expectations for the other two books, and those will probably end up being rated higher because, like I said, I very much enjoyed the romance itself. I think Chatty Ryan writes very mature, well-written romances. I just could not get over the fact that I went into it with certain expectations and they were not met. So 3.5 stars, still a good book. Just if you're going to pick it up for yourself, kind of remember that it is much more of a contemporary romance than it is a sports romance. And then we had our first 5-star read of the month, which was Immortal by Sue Lin-Tan. Now, I loved this book even more than I loved Daughter of the Moon Goddess and Heart of the Sun Warrior, which I think is like Sue Lin-Tan's most prominent works. But this book follows Li-Yen as she kind of experiences a family tragedy in the first couple chapters of this book. And that kind of prompts her to decide that she would like to end the kind of unequal partnership between her country and the Kingdom of the Golden Desert, which is an immortal kingdom. The two countries kind of have a deal where the Golden Desert protects Li-Yen's country, and in exchange, Li-Yen's country and the rulers are kind of obligated and indebted to the whims and wishes of the Queen of the Immortal Desert. And so when her grandfather dies at the beginning of this book, Li-Yen feels that the Kingdom of the Golden Desert is somewhat culpable for his death and has decided that, this agreement between the two kingdoms was meant to be much more temporary than it has turned out to be, and therefore would like it to come to an end. And so she sets off in theory to pledge her allegiance to the Queen of the Golden Desert, but actually in practice is trying to find a way to get the queen to let her country go. And in doing so, she meets and gets entangled with the god of war, who has the queen's ear, and therefore Leanne wants to try and win him over. But the two of them, chef's kiss. The banter is great. Their relationship is great. I really, really loved their dynamic. And I will say it is huge that I rated this book 5 stars because it has the amnesia trope in here, which I don't think is too much of a spoiler because realistically, we don't know that the character doesn't know until the character remembers. So, take that as you will. But I hate the amnesia trope with every single fiber of my being. Like, I don't know if anybody watches any Turkish dramas here, but I watched Sen Kalkampimi, which is I think the English title is You Knock on My Door. These dramas are the episodes are an hour and 40 minutes. It is a commitment. They are movie feature length long. I only had 12 episodes left or something like that. And when the amnesia trope cropped up in that show, I stopped watching it. I could not bring myself to do it. So that, if that tells you anything, I invested 30 episodes, which are an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes each. And the amnesia trope killed my enjoyment of the show. So for me to still rate this book 5 stars and have the amnesia trope pop up in here is huge. But if you read this book, please, 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 please come back and talk to me about it because nobody in my life has read it and I desperately want to chit chat with somebody about this book. So, excellent book. Highly recommend. You should definitely pick it up. And from there, I picked up Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Now, this is kind of sort of a reread for me. I picked it up last year and read about 250 to 300 pages of it. And then when I reorganized my bookshelf, I pulled it from my nightstand to make sure I remembered to leave space for it and promptly forgot it on the shelf. So I decided to start from scratch and read from the beginning with this just because I was pretty sure that I didn't have a good grasp on what I had read, and I'm kind of glad that I did. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. Now, the reason being is because I do very much enjoy Stephanie Garber's writing. I enjoy the whimsy. I enjoy her world building. I think she makes a really cool magic system, all of the above. But where I really struggle is her characters. And that might sound a little bit bad. I'm sorry. But Donatella is what killed this book for me, 100%, which is hilarious because she doesn't actually feature all that heavily. This book very much follows Scarlet. And I actually do quite enjoy Scarlet. But Donatella's kind of bookend appearances in this book, especially her appearance towards the end of this book, really pissed me off. And I just find that she was very nonchalant, devil may care about her sister's feelings. Really quickly, if you have not read this book follows Donatella and Scarlet, the Dragna sisters, as they decide to escape from under their father's thumb and participate in Caraval, which is a game held every year by the Master Legend. And it's kind of a chance to, if you win a prize. And of course, see the world through, magic and whimsy. So these two decide to go participate in Caraval, kind of, sort of, more like Donatella drags Scarlet to participate in Caraval and promptly disappears, which causes Scarlet no end of stress and anxiety, especially because as Scarlet comes to find out, the goal of the game is to find Donatella. Finding Donatella has gone missing, and now this entire town of people who are participating in Caraval are hunting for her sister. And, I can appreciate Donatella's plotting and scheming, and I think that, she is a very intelligent character. I just could not stand her treatment of Scarlet, and that is what did this book in for me. But I will be finishing this trilogy. I have enjoyed it. I just hope that I find Donatella a little less grating in future installments. And then we had a very near miss for a 5-star, which is Where the Dark Stands Still. This book follows Aliska as she tries to get rid of her magic. She is human, and it is very rare in this world for humans to have magic. And it kind of makes her an outsider. And she also has a very poor handle on it, which means that her control is not great. And after a big incident, which we don't find out until about like the 200-page mark in this book what that incident was, but it prompts her to decide to run off into the spirit woods and try and obtain the like fabled fern flower, which supposedly could get rid of her powers. And when she does so, she ends up encountering the Leshy, or the demon warden of the woods, who cuts her a deal. He's like, I will give you the flower in a year, but you have to serve me for that year. And she agrees to it and moves in with him. And of course, it follows the two of them as he tries to get her to get a better handle on her power. The two of them kind of have their own adventures. She tries to help him protect the woods, as, you know, that's his job, to be the warden of the woods, to protect the woods and, you know, keep everything that is in the woods away from the human settlements on the outside. And these two are very much enjoyable. I know that this book has been kind of compared to Howl's Moving Castle. I will say it does diverge. There are similar elements. For example, the Leshy's house is sentient. Kind of the way the magic in this world works is that the longer you spend time inhabiting or touching something inanimate, the more it kind of gains a sentience of its own. And so since the Leshy has lived in his house for, several centuries, the house very much has a character of its own. And, I loved the house as its kind of like own minor side character. I also loved Yaga, who is a house spirit that Liska summons early in her residence at the Leshy's manor. And Yaga is just absolutely hilarious. If you have watched Howl's Moving Castle or read the book, if you know Calcifer, kind of the same thing. Very snarky, very put upon, the whole 9 yards. But I will say, as much as I enjoyed this book, the reason it just ever so slightly missed the 5-star mark and got a 4.5 star is because the ending is not my favorite. I will say there's nothing wrong with the ending whatsoever, and it does fit in the plot of the book, but it's a kind of a type of ending that I have a personal pet peeve with, and therefore I don't enjoy those. And so that kind of docked a little bit. And then the other thing is, right before our, two leads get intimate for the first time, a secret comes out about somebody's past, and I kind of feel like the other person did not get time to process before they were in bed together. So those are the only 2 reasons it got 4.5 stars instead of 5. But if you have not read this book, I would highly, highly recommend. I think I'm going to say that about a lot of books this month. It was just a wonderful reading month. But, if you have read it or you read it, come back and talk to me about it, because like I said, nobody in my life has read this book and I am desperate to talk to somebody about it. And from there, I picked up A First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. I have read the entire Lovelight Farm series and I enjoyed it, so it was kind of a no-brainer to pick up her recent release. This book follows a romance between Aiden and Lucy and is Sleepless in Seattle inspired. Lucy is a single mom with a preteen daughter named Maya. Maya feels that her mother is lonely and decides to call into one of Baltimore's local radio stations that has a show that does romantic advice and try and, set Lucy up. And Lucy comes across her daughter on this phone call and it freaks out because she's like, who are you talking to this late at night? Who is this strange man that you have on the phone? And it turns out to be the host of Heartstrings, Aiden. And after some debate and some deliberation, Lucy decides to join Heartstrings to attempt to find a relationship. She was looking for a real romance and, somebody who understands her and understands her world and would like to be a part of it. And the wild thing is, of course, Lucy and Aiden have attention right off the bat, immediately. And, he, I think, falls first, but she definitely has very strong feelings for him. And the two of them are kind of battling their attraction together. They feel that, it's not very professional. It might not be in the best interest of the show because, he's trying to find her a relationship, not necessarily with him. And additionally, he feels that he can't give her what she is looking for because he has become increasingly like disillusioned with like the premise of his show and just romance in general. The quality of calls has declined. And then in his personal life, his parents have been very, very happily married. However, his mom has had repeated bouts with cancer, and he has really struggled to watch his dad and like cope with his mom's illness, and therefore kind of doesn't want to hand somebody that kind of power over himself. So I ended up rating this book 5 stars. I deeply enjoyed the romance between these two. They're oodles of fun. And then Lucy's found family that she kind of builds with her baby daddy and his husband and Maya and like her best friend Shandy is just wonderful. So if you're thinking about picking this up, you really, really should. And then from there, I was apparently feeling in very much a romance mood because I picked up Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is my first Emily Henry book, and boy, did I, goodness me. And boy, did I start in a really good spot. I ended up rating this book 4 stars. This follows our 2 main characters, Gus and January, who are both writers and published authors, who, one of which writes like much more, serious fiction, like, based on cults, thrillers, mysteries, explorations of human nature. And then January writes romances and happily ever afters. And the 2 of them have kind of had stuff in their personal lives that have made it very difficult for them to write their next books. And so, experiencing writer's block, they decide to get away and move to this small town in Michigan and end up being neighbors. And they do have a history together. They went to college together. He was a couple years older, and she kind of felt like he was always overly harsh when critiquing her work and, thought she was naive. And so she's a little bit hostile towards him, and he's a little baffled about why she is so, not having his nonsense. And, after they confide in each other on, a kind of semi-drunken night, what is going on in their professional worlds, they decide to make a bet. She will write the next great American novel, and he will write a happily ever after. And then they proceed to take each other on like research not dates, where, he takes her to interview people who have lost family members to cults, and she takes him on romantic dates, but not dates, obviously. And as, these things go, this brings them closer and closer together, and their relationship kind of develops from, academic and professional rivalry to friends to maybe sort of something more. Also on the backdrop of like this sleepy town in Michigan. And I really, really enjoyed this book, and I am so excited that I have the rest of Emily Henry's back list because I will definitely be prioritizing them in the near future. And then from there, I picked up As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson, which is the 3rd and final installment in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And I ended up rating this book 3 stars, which is really disappointing to say because I loved A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I rated it 5 stars. And then I did enjoy, Good Girl, Bad Blood, which is the 2nd book. So I kind of had high hopes for this one, especially because the plot of this one is much more Pip-centric in the sense of Pip is dealing with her own mystery. She's kind of been dealing with other people's mysteries and, cases, and now she has one for herself, which is she is being stalked by someone whose MO seems to line up with a local serial killer who is supposedly behind bars, which then begs the question, is this a copycat or is the wrong person behind bars? And when Pip initially takes these kind of happenings to the police say, this is not enough for us to do anything, and therefore Pip is, of course, bound and determined to solve this for herself. I will say the reason that this book ended up being rated 3 stars and not any higher is because, of course, Pip is not a particularly likable character to begin with, but I found her even less likable in this book. I think Holly Jackson does a good job of writing complicated characters who are somewhat difficult to like and relate to, i.e. if you have read the reappearance of Rachel Price, Belle is kind of a pain in the butt. But also there was a huge twist in the middle of this book. So when you hit part 2, the book kind of takes off on a whole different trajectory, and that I just wasn't interested in the second half of this book. So that is what it is. But if you have any interest in this series, I would definitely still say you should pick it up. And to kind of round out my A Good Girl's Guide to a Murder journey, I ended up also picking up Killjoy, which is the prequel novella. This follows Pip as she attends a murder mystery party at her friend Connor's house. And as Pip does, she gets very obsessed with the, clue murder mystery kind of game and case. And when the ending is not what she expects it to be, she decides that she's going to take on a real life case that might seem fairly simplistic on the surface, but might be more complicated underneath, which is how she ends up taking on the Sal Singh and Andy Bell case in the first novel. So I will say, if you are like me and you find Aunt and Lauren really, really annoying, this is, of course, back when Pip, Aunt, and Lauren were still friends, and they show up in this book, and they are just as obnoxious as they have always been. So be prepared for that if you are Aunt and Lauren haters like I am. And then I finished the month with The Songbird and the Heart of Stone by Carissa Broadbent. This is the third book in the Crowns of Nyaxia series and the first book in the Shadowborn duet, because if you're unfamiliar with this series, it is following, it's a series of interconnected duologies. And I was loving this book. I will say I do not love the relationship between Misha and Asar, our two leads, as much as I did Rain and Araya in the first duet, because Carissa Broadbent kind of does a good job of like keeping Asar very mysterious, but she does it for way too long. And so by the time she finally starts introducing like character backstory, and you start at the point where you would want to like be emotionally invested in the character, you just aren't. So I do love Misha, and I've always loved Misha, so I was very excited for her books. And I will say that I enjoyed the quest in this book more than I enjoyed the Kildari or the games in the first duet. So in this book, Asar and Misha embark on a quest or a mission laid out by the goddess Nyaxia, and it involves them basically going to each different level of the underworld and collecting an item. And the god Atraxas, who's the sun god and the leader of the White Pantheon, or the gods in this world, does not want this mission to succeed. And Misha, prior to the becoming a vampire, was a priestess and bride of the sun god. And so she kind of has split loyalties. And therefore, when Atraxas says, I don't want this mission to succeed, she eventually has to decide where her loyalties lie. Does she want to continue working with and supporting Asar and, potentially building a relationship with him? Or does she want to try and win back the love of her god and sabotage this mission? So I enjoyed the mission. I enjoyed the god's involvement. But the reason I ended up rating this 3.5 stars, whereas the first duet was most definitely more of a 4.5, and Six Scorched Roses, which is the associated novella, was absolutely 100% a 5-star read, even though I don't rate novellas, is the ending. The ending felt like it came out of left field. It felt like it lacked any context for me. And it kind of left us in a place where I do think that the next book could be really, truly excellent, but it just took everything that I loved about the first book and kind of stomped on it a little bit. So take that as you will. I will be reading the next book, and I am still looking forward to it. It's just that this, was not quite my jam, between the fact that we're not particularly attached to Asar, and then I didn't love the ending. So those are the 11 books I read in the month of March. I will say I did not do so great on my TBR. I picked 10 books in my March TBR video, and we only ended up reading 6. The ones that got left behind were Ancillary Justice and The Dutch House, neither of which is particularly surprising because they're not genres I typically gravitate towards. And then I also didn't pick up The Zodiac Academy or The Shadow of the Gods, both of which I think just more had to do with the length of the books. So I will be trying to fold those 4 books into my April reading, so stay tuned and see if I succeed there. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you would like to stick around for a while, please subscribe. Either way, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a good one. Bye!